As we continue the book of Acts, we'll look again at the Apostle Paul as he continues his journey. We just finished the third missionary journey, and now he's at Jerusalem, and it will probably be the last time he will be at Jerusalem. This one gives you an overview of the journeys, and this one gives you the third missionary journey plus Paul's trip to Rome. Verse 17 says, when we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers received us warmly. Paul has really completed his third missionary journey at this point. With the help of those sent by the apostles from the Gentile congregations, he has brought their gift for the poor among the Jewish saints in Judea. We'll see in this section Paul acts on the advice of James, the Lord's brother, to disprove the accusations of the Jews that he's a traitor to his nation. However, he's attacked by them, then rescued and protected by the Romans in their barracks, but he also gets to tell his story to the crowd. Verse 18 says, the next day Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and the elders were present. James was a half-brother of Jesus and the brother of Jude, who wrote the New Testament book called by that name. James, the Lord's brother, was not an apostle. He's mentioned here simply as a spiritually minded individual, a spiritual leader that Paul met. Paul doesn't say James was an apostle in the sense that the 12 were apostles. Galatians 1:19 is one of those times where the Greek word apostolos is used in the generic meaning that is, one that is sent. One is sent by a congregation. One was sent by an individual. You know, if I send my friend down to the shop to get a loaf of bread for me, he can really be called my apostle, one that I have sent for a specific message or task. The congregations sent out men in the first century. These evangelists, like James, were thus referred to as apostles. They were not Christ-sent apostles. These congregation-sent apostles didn't have the power of Christ-sent apostles. Lots of people today on the God channel who call themselves apostles are certainly not of the same caliber as the 12 apostles in the first century. And most they can claim is to have been sent out by their local congregations to go on the God channel and confuse people. However, because they were not sent out by a congregation to preach the gospel, they were referred to as apostles or those who were sent. You can see the quality of James as an individual with great spiritual ability when you read the book of James. All the elders were present. These present seem to be imply that the special meeting had been arranged with James and all these elders from various congregations in Jerusalem. Once before, when alms were brought to Jerusalem, they were entrusted to the elders for distribution among the needy. Paul, in verse 19, says, Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. Paul gave to James, the elders, and whoever else was there, a full report of all God had accomplished through him since the last time they had seen him. They were happy for all God had done among the Gentiles through the Apostle Paul. But as we shall see, they warned him about the Jews, even the believing Jews, and how they felt about him. They considered him a traitor to their nation. Notice Paul emphasized that God had done his work. God was working through Paul. Paul would have told how many Gentiles had forsaken their idols, were living faithful to God, even to the point where attendance at idols' temples had greatly fallen off. He would have explained out how out of gratitude of these Gentiles had led them to undertake a generous contribution to the brethren at Jerusalem. Paul would have introduced the messengers of the congregation who carried the offering. Perhaps he told the individual congregations they represented as he introduced each man. Verse 20 says, when they heard this, they praised God. Then he said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are still zealous for the law. Their praise to God also showed that they were in full agreement with Paul in his teaching and the practice among the Gentiles. They said to him, as we saw in Acts 19:21, the offering was an attempt of Paul to heal the breach between the Jewish and Gentile Christians. There was an animosity towards Jews that Christians' faith and love had helped the Gentile Christians to overcome. There was also a deep-seated animosity towards any Gentile on the part of the Jews, and they too needed to practice some Christian faith and love. Many Jewish Christians were still observing some parts of the law of Moses, in particular the sacrifices, the distinction of meats and days, the hours and prayers and the feasts. It may seem surprising that these Christians should continue to observe the Mosaic rites, since the law was abolished and nailed to the cross. But we have to remember the Mosaic law was ordained by God, and the Jews had been trained all their lives before becoming Christians in observance of his statutes. There was nothing sinful in the actual acts themselves. People are slow to give up old traditional way of doing business, even when they know a better way. Zealousness for the law had become almost a national characteristic among the Jews. Verse 21 says, "They were informed by that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to their customs." Some deliberately have been spreading these false teachings about Paul among the Jewish community of believers. Gossip rumours are still favourite ways to destroy those who take a stand for truth, right. They heard Paul taught these things. They heard that the Jews should forsake Moses, they should not circumcise their children, they should not walk according to the customs. We must remember that the laws of Moses were not just religious laws, but also civil laws for the nation of Israel. Many of the believing Jews believed they should continue to circumcise their male children and observe all the Jewish festivals and other customs of their culture. Paul believed Jews could continue to observe these things if they wanted to, although he believed that they had nothing to do with salvation or one's relationship with God. Had Paul himself not observed the law of a Nazirite oath? Acts 15:1 said, "Some men came down from Judea to Antioch were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved." This brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. To the Jews I became a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under that law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law. Paul took a firm stand that Gentiles were not required to observe the Jewish law and were not required to be circumcised. He had refused to allow Titus, whose father and mother were both Greeks, to be circumcised. He did have Timothy circumcised because his mother was a Jew, though his father was a Greek, so that the preaching of the gospel wouldn't be hindered among the Jews. For a Jew, circumcision has nothing to do with salvation, but is something that makes a Jew culturally a Jew in the thinking of the Jewish community. Verse 22 said, "What is to be done? A crowd is sure to gather, for they will hear you have come. So this is what we suggest that you should do. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites and pay their expenses, so they can have their heads shaved. Then everybody will know there's no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law." As for the Gentile Christians, we aren't asking them to follow these Jewish customs at all, except for the ones we wrote you about: not to eat food offered to idols, not to eat blood meat from strangled animals, and not commit any kind of sexual sin. James suggested that Paul go with 4 Jewish men who, like him, were completing the period of their Nazareth vows and were offering the sacrifices for their purification. The reason for this is that they would help him to blend in and not be noticed so much. But we know it didn't work. Paul was recognized and a riot ensued. The accusations were false because Paul never taught Jews not to circumcise their sons. These 4, as a comparison of what is said to them here with the law of Nazarite, clearly shows were under a Nazarite vow. Numbers 6:19 says, "After the Nazarite is shaved off his head of his dedication, the priest is to place in his hands a boiled shoulder of the ram." Numbers 6 verse 9 says, "If someone dies suddenly in his presence, thus defiling the hair he has dedicated, he must shave his head on the day of his cleansing, the 7th day." The indication given here in Acts says these men who had this vow had become unclean. Accidentally touching a dead body would be one way a man could become unclean before the termination of the time included in the vow. What cultural things do we do in religion today because it's expected of us rather than commanded of us? How much should we consider culture in keeping peace among believers and in reaching out to the lost? This had been a decision the apostles and elders had made under the guidance of the Holy Spirit in the Jerusalem conference, as recorded in Acts 15, to keep these certain things. The day after Paul talked to James and the elders, he went to the temple to give the priests the notice of the date when the 7 days of purification would end and when the offering could be made. It was in one of the 7 days of purification ritual that some Jews from the province of Asia recognized him and told the crowd. This started an uproar. The crowd tried to kill him, but as you'll see, he was rescued by the Roman officer. 27:28 says, when the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Men of Israel, help us! This is a man who teaches all men everywhere against our people and our law in this place. Besides, he brought Greeks into the temple area and defiled this holy place." They had briefly seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with Paul, and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple area. None of the accusations made by the mob are true, but these kind of false accusations are easily made by people whose only desire is to harm their enemies by whatever means they can. Lying about the prophets, Jesus, the apostles, and other Christian leaders has never been a problem for the persecutors of God's leaders. Paul would never dare bring Gentiles into the temple area. That would have brought certain death to them. A warning inscription had been posted in this area, has been found by archaeologists, threatening death to any Gentile who would cross the line into the holy precepts of the temple. The translation is, "No foreigners to go beyond the balustrade and the plaza of the temple zone. Whoever is caught doing so will have himself to blame for his death, which will follow." Verse 30, the whole city was aroused, and people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. While they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in uproar. This mob uproar was similar to what had happened in Ephesus. Most of the people involved in the uproar didn't know what was going on. They just wanted to be part of the excitement. Jesus said these people are like sheep without a shepherd. The whole flock of sheep will run to follow any sheep that looks as if it knows where it is going. When we find out the sheep didn't know where they would go, they would wait for the next such indication, then they would be off and running again. Our generation is no different. It once took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. 33 says the commander came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound in 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another, and since the commander couldn't get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. Paul reached the steps. The violence of the mob was so great he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him!" As the soldiers were about to take Paul into barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" "Do you speak Greek?" he replied. "Are you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out in the desert some time ago?" The Egyptian was probably a Jew from Alexandria or some other city in Egypt. Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells of such a person in his Antiquities of the Jews and the Wars of the Jews. According to Josephus, he came to Jerusalem and led a rebellion against Romans in the city, but Felix the governor sent the army against him. Many of his followers were killed and captured, but he escaped. Paul answered, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please, let me speak to the people." Having received the commander's permission, Paul stood in the steps and motioned to the crowd. When they were all silent, he spoke to them in Aramaic. Paul had spoken to the commander in Greek. Now he speaks to the crowd in the Hebrew dialect, Aramaic. Thus fulfilled the prophecy of Agabus and others, Paul begins his period of imprisonment that will lead to his voyage to Rome. He will appear in the court of Caesar, exercising the right of appeal that belongs to every Roman citizen. If it were not for the fact that Paul was a Roman citizen under the protection of Rome, he would have been dead by now. Jesus didn't have the civil rights that Paul had. We'll catch up with him next time. Look forward to seeing you. Every blessing.